Up until the 1940s, humanity never had the power to destroy themselves. That changed with the arrival of the atomic bombs. When the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, humanity finally saw they had the capacity to destroy themselves. In our timeline, this never happened. But what if it did? Welcome to the world of Fallout. The Fallout universe is one of a post-apocalyptic survival world, with over 300 years of history and lore between World War II and the latest events in Fallout 4. Our story starts with the event known as the Divergence. This is what split the Fallout timeline from the real-world timeline that we know in ours. It's argued where this actual divergence was. Some people say it's as far back as almost 1300 with old English kings. Some say it's farther back with the arrival of aliens on the planet Earth. But most people have come to believe that the first major divergence did happen after World War II. After World War II, instead of the USSR in a Cold War with America, the USSR collapsed. But a much more powerful communist China took its place and created a much more heated Cold War between the two global superpowers. From these events here, we see the main divergence of the timeline, where our history takes a much darker path. From here, we see the United States beginning its slow fall. China created a lot more tension than the USSR did, which in turn destroyed the morale of the US. Following the adoption of the 50th state Alaska, the United States decided to reorganize the states into the 13 commonwealths, which was a step in between the state and federal government. More powerful than the state government, but still weaker than the federal. The flag was amended to have 14 stars instead of 50, 13 for each commonwealth, and 1 to represent the federal government and the nation united as a whole. However, this further weakened the United States overall. After their reorganization, the US founded the USSA and sent Vigo 2 to the moon. Richard Wade, Mark Garris, and Michael Hagen were the first people to walk on the moon. The USSR and China did not believe these claims, though. The next major event isn't until the turn of the 21st century, when the West Tech Company is founded, and Robert House was born in the same year, which is now 2020. As tension begins to rise by the 2030s, Vault-Tec is founded, and they rebrand Morgantown University in West Virginia to Vault-Tec University in 2031. After the advancement with nuclear technology in this decade, a new company, General Atomics, brings to the market Mr. Handy, the first of its series of robots to be used for construction purposes and then commercial use later. As the 2040s began, fear of the global oil reserves began to start. The Tibet's prison is commandeered by the US government along with Vault-Tec and Poseidon Oil, which will begin to tie into their new Project Safe House. This is where we will see the beginning of the vaults. This project was brought on by Vault-Tec with the help of the US government to build hardened subterranean installations that would serve as safe houses to select US citizens in the case of a complete nuclear holocaust or other major disasters. To the public, this would be seen as simple fallout shelters, but Vault-Tec and the US government had much darker plans. Very few of the known 122 vaults to be constructed would serve as actual fallout shelters. Many would serve as elaborate experimentations on unknown humans. Project Safe House was officially set in motion in 2054, after the total collapse of the United Nations and the following breakout of the Euro-Middle Eastern War. After oil reserves began to run dry, Middle Eastern countries and companies created massive price hikes on oil, which led to hostility between them and Europe and eventually war. The average price of a barrel of oil rose well to above $1,000 from an average price of $60 a barrel. The UN tried to keep the situation under control, but this led to heated debates and many nations withdrawing. The UN collapsed in July of 2052. From here, the conflict only escalated, and everybody was able to gain access to nuclear weapons, including terrorists. In December of 2053, for the first time in over 100 years, a nuclear weapon was used by terrorists in Tel Aviv. From here, a small nuclear exchange took place in the Middle East, causing a nuclear scare worldwide. This would continue well into 2060, with all nations withdrawing troops because the oil reserves ran dry. Both Europe and the Middle East were reduced to ruins with no victor. Europe would plunge into a deep civil war after. From here, even more, the pressure was put on for companies for fission and nuclear research. Although first discovered during the Euro-Middle Eastern War, the new plague, originating from China, began to ravage the world, especially the United States. The spread of the new plague fueled national paranoia. At the beginning of the pandemic, even more vaults would begin construction, including Vault 76 in early 2065. The reservation has also given orders to produce nuclear missiles that can be fired from an orbital platform. Later this year, Robert House concludes that the atomic war will occur within 15 years. He concluded this with mathematic certainty. In June, the New York City population was well over 17 million, and the enormous demand for electricity caused the reactor to go supercritical. Power rationing was introduced for the first time. After heated discussions with his cabinet, the U.S. president said that the remaining oil reserves will be used only by the U.S. Fusion cells are also created, a key component to the power armor project by Westech. Parts of the U.S. are supplied with fusion power. Then in late 2066, the unthinkable happens. China invades the United States through Alaska. The Sino-American War begins. The Anchorage front line is established, and the U.S. officially declares war on China. Tensions rise between the U.S. and Canada because of the troops passing through to Alaska. Canada eventually backs down, which sets the stage for the Canadian annexation. As 2067 begins, the first suits of power armor are unveiled and sent to Alaska. The T-45 model was able to stop the Chinese offensive into Alaska, but not repel it. The next major event doesn't occur until 2071, when Westech is put under military command. Under military command, T-51 power armor is introduced and sent to Alaska. This manages to push the Chinese fully out of Alaska. The Chinese are completely pushed out during Operation Anchorage in 2077. The Canadian annexation occurs the same year. Gas prices skyrocket to an average of $8,500 per gallon. U.S. citizens begin to protest this and other laws caused by the new plague. Martial law is declared. Later into the year, Roger Maxson, a former member of the U.S. Army, discovers the government using military and prisoners for experiments at the Mariposa military base. Maxson executes the leaders and declares the base's desertion from the Army. This would be the founding moment for the Brotherhood of Steel. China soon surrenders, ending the Sino-American War, but peace wouldn't last long. A day later, the Great War would begin.